Chapter 15 of Potash and Perlmutter, Their Co-Partnership Ventures and Adventures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Potash and Perlmutter, Their Co-Partnership Ventures and Adventures by Montague Glass. Chapter 15. Who do you think I seen it in Hammersmith's just now, Morris? Abe Potash shouted as he burst into the showroom one Saturday afternoon in April. I ain't deaf, Abe, Morris replied. Who did you seen it? J. Edward Kleebaum from Minneapolis, Abe answered. Morris shrugged. What do you want me to do, Abe? He asked. Abe ignored the question. He promised he would come in at 2 o'clock and look over the line, he announced triumphantly. Plenty crooks looked over our line already, Abe, Morris commented. And so far as I'm concerned, they could look over it all they want to, Abe, as long as they shouldn't buy nothing from us. What do you mean, crooks? Abe cried. The way Kleebaum talks, he would give us an order for $1,000 goods, maybe, Morris. He ain't no crook. Ain't he? Morris replied. What's the reason he ain't, Abe? The way I look at it, Abe, when a fella makes it a dirty failure, like that fella made it in Milwaukee, Abe, and then goes to Cleveland, Abe, and opens up as the Bon March, Abe, and does another bust-up, Abe, and then he goes to Enough, Morris, Abe interrupted. Them things is from old times already. Today is something else again. The fella done a tremendous business last spring, Morris, and this season everybody's falling all over themselves to sell him goods. Looky here, Abe, Morris broke in. You think the fella ain't a crook? And you're entitled to think all you want to, Abe, but I seen it Saul Klinger yesterday, and what do you think he told me? I don't know what he told you, Morris, Abe replied. But it wouldn't be the first time, Morris, that a fella tells lies about a concern that he couldn't sell goods to, Morris. It's the old story of the dog and the grapes. Morris looked hurt. I'm surprised you should call a decent, respectable fella like Saul Klinger a dog, Abe, he said. That fella has always been a good friend of ours, Abe, and even if he wouldn't be, Abe, that ain't no way to talk about a concern what does a business like Klinger and Klein. Don't make no speeches, Morris, Abe retorted. Go ahead and tell me what Saul Klinger told you about J. Edward Kleebaum. Why, Saul Klinger says that he hears it on good authority, Abe, that the lowlife got 2 automobiles, Abe. What do you think for a crook like that? So far what I hear, Morris, it ain't such a terrible crime that a fella should get 2 automobiles. In that case, Morris, Andrew Carnegie would be a murderer yet. I bet you he already got 50 automobiles. It's all right, Abe, Morris cried. Andrew Carnegie ain't looking to buy off us goods, Abe. Even so, Abe, he never made it a couple of failures like Kleebaum, Abe. Well, Morris, is that all you got against him? He owns an automobile? Maybe he plays golf too, Morris. Golf I don't know nothing about, Abe, Morris replied. But Auction Pinochle, he does play it, Abe. Saul Klinger says that out in Minneapolis, Kleebaum hangs out with a bunch of loafers what considers $1 100 chicken feet already. Abe rose to his feet. Let me tell you something, Morris, he said. I got over them old-fashioned ideas that a fella shouldn't spend the money he makes in the way what he wants to. If Kleebaum wants to buy automobiles, that's his business, not mine, Morris. And for my part, Morris, if that fella was to come in here and buy from us $1,000 goods, Morris, I'm in favor we should sell him. You could do what you please, Abe, Morris declared as he put on his hat. Only one thing I beg of you, Abe. Don't never put it up to me, Abe, that I was in favor of the fella from the start. Sure not, Morris, Abe replied, because you wouldn't never let me forget it. Where you going now, Morris? I told you yesterday where I was going, Abe, Morris said impatiently. Me and Minnie is going out to Johnsonhurst to see her cousin, Mo Fixman. Mo Fixman, Abe repeated. Ain't that the same Fixman what was partners together with Max Guterkunst? Morris nodded. Well, you want to keep your hand in your pocket, Morris, Abe went on, because I hear it on good authority that feller ain't above selling the milk from his baby's bottle. Morris paused with his hand on the doorknob. That's the first I hear about it, Abe, he said. Certainly, when a fella gets together a little money, you understand, always there is somebody what knocks him, Abe. Who told you about this fixment, Abe? A fella by the name of Sol Klinger, Morris, Abe replied, and if you don't believe me, you could. But Morris cut off further comment by banging the door behind him, and Abe turned to his task of preparing the sample line for his prospective customer's inspection. A half an hour later, J. Edward Kleebaum entered the showroom and extended his hand to Abe. "Hello, Potash," he said. "You got to excuse me. I'm a little late on account. I had to look at a machine up on 50th Street. "That's a sample, I suppose it, ain't it?" Abe said. "No," Kleebaum replied. "It's one of their stock machines, a Pfingst, 1909 model." "Pfingst!" Abe exclaimed. "That's a new one on me. Certainly, I believe a fella should buy the machines what suits his purpose. But with Morris and me, when we was running our own shop, we bought nothing but standard makes, like Keeler and Silcox and them other machines." At this juncture, Kleebaum broke into a hearty laugh. "This machine is all right for what I would want it," he said. "In fact, I got it right down in the front of the door now. It's a 1909 Pfingst, 6-cylinder, roadster, up to date, and runs like the chronometer already." "Oh, an automobile!" Abe cried. "Excuse me, Mr. Kleebaum. Automobiles ain't in my line, Mr. Kleebaum. I'm satisfied I should know something about the cloak and suit business, Mr. Kleebaum. Now, here is a garment which me and Morris don't consider one of our leaders at all, Mr. Kleebaum, but I bet you that if another concern as us would put out a garment like that, Mr. Kleebaum, they would make such a holler about it that you would think nobody else knows how to make garments but them." "When a fella's got the goods, Potash," Kleebaum replied, as he lit one of Abe's gilt-edged cigars, "he's got a right to holler. Now you take this here Pfingst car. It is made by the Pfingst Manufacturing Company, a millionaire concern, and them people advertise it to beat the band. And why shouldn't they advertise it? Them people got a car there, which it is a wonder, Potash, how they could sell a car like that for $2,500. I don't know. The body alone must cost them people a couple of $1,000. "That's always the way, Mr. Kleebaum," Abe broke in hurriedly. "Now you take this here garment, Mr. Kleebaum. People would say, how is it possible that Potash and Perlmutter can turn out a garment like this for $18? And certainly, Mr. Kleebaum, I don't say we lose money on it, you understand? Only we got, but this here car, Potash, has selective transmission, shaft drive, and say, looky here, Kleebaum," Abe cried. "Am I trying to sell you some cloaks, or you trying to sell me an automobile? Because if you are, I'm sorry, I got to tell you, I ain't in the market for an automobile just at present. On the other hand, Mr. Kleebaum, I got a line of garments here, which it is a pleasure for me to show you, even if you wouldn't buy so much as a button." "Go ahead, Potash," Kleebaum said, "and we'll talk about the car after you get through." For over 2 hours, Abe displayed the firm's sample line, and his efforts were at last rewarded by a generous order from Kleebaum. "That makes in all $2,100 worth of goods," Kleebaum announced. "And if you think you could stand the pressure, Potash, I could smoke another cigar in you already." "Excuse me, Mr. Kleebaum," Abe cried, producing another of his best cigars. "Much obliged," Kleebaum mumbled as he lit up. "And now, Abe, after business comes with me pleasure. What do you say to a little spin uptown in this here Pfingst car, which I got it waiting for me downstairs?" Abe waved his hand with the palm out. "You could go as far as you like, Mr. Kleebaum," he replied. "But when it comes to automobiles, Mr. Kleebaum, you got to excuse me. I ain't never rode in one of them things yet, and I guess you couldn't learn it. An old dog, he should study new tricks, ain't it?" "Do you mean to tell me you ain't never rode in an automobile yet?" Kleebaum exclaimed. "You got it right," Abe said, "and what's more, I ain't never going to neither." "What are you trying to give me?" Kleebaum asked. "You mean to say if I would ask you, you should come riding with me now, you would turn me down?" "I bet you I would," Abe declared. "An up-to-date fellow like you, Kleebaum, is different already from an old-timer like me. I got a wife, Kleebaum, and also I don't carry a whole lot of insurance neither, you understand?" "Come off, Potash," Kleebaum cried. "I rode myself in automobiles already millions of times, and I ain't never been hurted yet." "Some people's got all the luck, Kleebaum," Abe replied. "With me, I bet you I would ride in an automobile once. You understand? The least that would happen to me is I should break my neck." "How could you break your neck in a brand new car like a Pfingst car downstairs?" Kleebaum insisted. "Never mind," Abe answered. "If things is going to turn out that way, Mr. Kleebaum, you could break your neck in the baby carriage yet." "Well, don't get mad about it, Potash," Kleebaum said. "Me, I don't get mad so easy," Abe declared. "Wouldn't you come downstairs to Hammersmith's and take a cup of coffee or something?" Together they descended to the sidewalk, where they were saluted by a tremendous chugging from the Pfingst roadster. "Say, my friend," the demonstrating chauffeur cried as he caught sight of Kleebaum, "what do you think I'm running anyway, a taxicab?" "You shouldn't get fresh, young fella," Kleebaum retorted, "unless you'd want to lose your job." "Ah, quit your stalling," the chauffeur protested. "Is this the guy you was telling me about?" Kleebaum frowned and contorted one side of his face with electrical rapidity. "Say, my friend," the chauffeur replied, entirely unmoved, "them gestures don't go down with me. Is this guy you was telling me the boss you would jolly into buying a car? Because—" Kleebaum turned to Abe and elaborately assumed an expression of amiable deprecation. "That's a salesman for you," he exclaimed. Abe surveyed Kleebaum with a puzzled stare. "Say, looky here, Kleebaum," he said. "If you thought you would get me to buy an automobile by giving me this here order, Kleebaum, I'm satisfied you should cancel it, because again I got to tell you, Kleebaum, I ain't in the market for automobiles just yet a while." Kleebaum clapped Abe on the shoulder. "The fella don't know what he's talking about, Potash," he declared. "He's thinking of somebody quite different as you. That order stands, Potash. And now, if you'll excuse me my joining you in that cup of coffee, Potash, I got to say goodbye." He wrung Abe's hand in farewell and jumped into the seat beside the chauffeur, while Abe stood on the sidewalk and watched them disappear down the street. "I bet you that order stands," he mused. "It stands in my store until I get a couple of good reports on that fella." "What a house that fella Fixman got it, Abe," Morris Perlmutter exclaimed on Monday morning. "A regular palace, and mind you, Abe, you don't pay $10 more a month as I do up in 118th Street. And what a difference there is in the yard, Abe. Me, I look out on a bunch of fire escapes, while Fixman got a fine garden with trees and flowers, pretty near as good as a cemetery." "Well, why don't you move to Johnsonhurst too, Morris?" Abe Potash said. "It's an elegant neighborhood, Morris. Me and Rosie was over to Johnsonhurst one day last summer, and it took us 3 hours to get out there and 3 hours to get back. 6 cigars I busted in my vest pockets at the bridge yet, and Rosie pretty near fainted in the crowd. Yes, Morris, it's an elegant neighborhood, I bet you. That was on Sunday in the summertime, Abe. But Fixman says if he leaves his house at 7 o'clock, he's in his office at 7:45. "I believe it, Morris," Abe commented ironically. "That fellow Fixman never got downtown in his life before 9 o'clock. He shouldn't tell me nothing like that, Morris, because I know Fixman since way before the Spanish War already. And that fellow is always a big bluff, you understand? Sol Klinger tells me he's got also an automobile." "Sol Klinger could talk all he wants, Abe," Morris replied. "Fixman told me that if he had the money what Klinger sinks in one stock already, Abe, he could run a dozen automobiles. Sure, Fixman's got an automobile. With the money that fella makes, Abe, he's got a right to got an automobile. Klinger should be careful what he tells about people, Abe. The fella will get himself into serious trouble some day. He's all the time knocking somebody, ain't it?" "Is that so?" Abe said. "I thought Klinger was such a good friend to us, Morris. Also, Morris, you say yourself on Saturday that a fellow what's got an automobile is a crook yet." "Me?" Morris cried indignantly. "I never said no such thing, Abe. Always you got to twist around what I say, Abe. What I told you was—" "It's all right, Morris," Abe said. "I'll take your word for it. What I want to talk to you about now is this here J. Edward Kleebaum. He gives us an order for $2,100, Morris." Good, Morris exclaimed. Good, Abe repeated with a rising inflection. Say, Morris, what's the matter with you today, anyway? Nothing's the matter with me, Abe. What do you mean? I mean that on Saturday you wouldn't sell Kleebaum not $1 worth of goods, Morris. And even myself, I was only willing we should go $1,000 on the fella. And now today, when I tell you he gives you an order for $2,100, Morris, you say good? Sure, I say good, Morris replied. Why not? Just because a sucker like Sol Klinger knocks a fella, Abe, that ain't saying the fella's NG. Furthermore, Abe, suppose a fella does run a couple of automobiles. You understand, Abe? Does that say he's going to bust up right away? That's an idea with a back number like Klinger got it, Abe. But with me, I think differently. There's worse things as automobiles to ride in, Abe. Believe me, Fixman takes out his wife and me on Saturday afternoon, and we had a fine time. We went pretty near to Boston, I bet you. To Boston? Abe exclaimed. Well, we seen the Boston boats going out, and a fine view of the City College also, and a gas factory, in North Beach too. Everything went off beautiful, Abe, and I assure you, Minnie and me, we come home feeling fine. I tell you, Abe, a fella has got to ride in one of them things to appreciate 'em. It's all right, Morris, Abe cried. I'll take your word for it. What I'm worrying about now, Morris, is this here Kleebaum. Kleebaum is A1, Abe, Morris said. I was talking to Fixman about him, and Fixman says that there ain't a better judge of an automobile between Chicago and the Pacific Coast. Say, looky here, Morris, Abe asked. Are we in the cloak and suit business, or are we in the automobile business? Kleebaum buys from us cloaks, not automobiles, and while I ain't got such good judgment when it comes to automobiles, I think I know something about the cloak and suit business, and I got an idea that fella is out to do us. Why, Abe, you don't know that feller at all, Morris protested. Why don't you make some investigations about the feller, Abe? Investigations is nix, Morris, Abe replied impatiently. When a fella is a crook, Morris, he could fool everybody, Morris. He could fix things so the mercantile agencies would only find out good things about him. And he buffaloes credit men so that to hear him talk you would think he was a millionaire already. No, Morris, when you are dealing with a crook, investigations is nix. You got to depend on your own judgment. But Abe, Morris cried, you got a wrong idea about the fella. Fixman tells me Kleebaum does a fine business in Minneapolis. He has an elegant trade there, and he's got a system of automobile delivery, which Fixman says is great. He's got 3 light runabouts fixed up with removable tonneaus, 30 horsepower, 2-cylinder engines, and... At this juncture, Abe rose to his feet and hurried indignantly toward the cutting room, where Morris joined him 5 minutes later. Say, Abe, he said, while me and Minnie was out with Fixman on Saturday, I got a fine idea for an automobile rap. Abe turned and fixed his partner with a terrible glare. Tell it to Kleebaum, he roared. I did, Morris said genially, and he thought it would make a big hit in the trade. Why, when did you see the Kleebaum? Abe asked. This morning, on my way over to Lenox Avenue. I met Sol Klinger as him and me was buying papers near the subway station. Comes a big automobile by the curb, and Kleebaum is sitting with another feller in the front seat, what they call a chauffeur. And Kleebaum says, get in, I'll take you downtown. So we get in, and I bet you we come downtown in 15 minutes. Ain't Klinger scared to ride in one of them things, Morris? Abe asked. Scared, Abe? Why should the fella be scared? Not only wasn't scared, Abe, but he took up Kleebaum's offer for a ride down to Coney Island yet. Kleebaum said they'd be back by 10 o'clock, and so Klinger asks me to telephone over to Klein that he would be a little late this morning. That's a fine way for a fellow to neglect his business, Morris, Abe commented. Morris nodded without enthusiasm. By the way, Abe, he said, me and Minnie about decided we would rent the house next door to Fixman's down in Johnsonhurst. So I guess we will go down there again this afternoon at 3 o'clock. At 3 o'clock? Abe cried. Say, looky here, Morris, what do you think this is here anyway, a bank? Must I ask you, Abe, if I want to leave early once in a while? Once in a while is all right, Morris, but when a fella does it every day, that's something else again. When did I done it every day, Abe? Morris demanded. Saturday is the first time I leave here early in a year already, while pretty near every afternoon, Abe. You got an excuse. You should see a customer up in Broadway and 29th Street. Shall I tell you something, Morris? Abe cried suddenly. You are going for an automobile ride with J. Edward Kleebaum. Morris flushed vividly. Supposing I am, Abe, he replied. Ain't Kleebaum a customer from ours? And how could I turn down a customer, Abe? Maybe he's a customer, Morris, but I wouldn't be certain of it, because you could go automobile riding with him if you want to, Morris. But me, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to look that feller up, Morris, and I bet you when I get through, Morris, we would sooner be selling goods to some of them cutthroats up in Sing Sing already. At 3 o'clock, Minnie entered swathed in veils and a huge fur coat. Well, Abe, she said, did you hear the latest? We are going to move to Johnsonhurst. I wish you joy. Abe grunted. We got a swell place down there, she went on. 5 bedrooms, a parlor, and a library with a great big kitchen and a garage. A what? Abe cried. A place where you put your automobiles into, Morris explained. Is that so? Abe said as he jammed his hat on with both hands. Well, that don't do no harm, Morris, because you could also use it for a doghouse. He slammed the door behind him, and 5 minutes later he entered the business premises of Klinger & Klein. There he found the senior member of the firm busy over the sample line. Hello, Sol, he cried. I just seen it Mr. Brady, credit man for the Manhattan Mills, and he says he come across you riding in an automobile near Coney Island at 9 o'clock this morning already. He says he always thought you and Klein was pretty steady people, but I says nowadays you couldn't never tell nothing about nobody. 'Cause a feller is a Talmudist already, Mr. Brady, I says. That don't say he ain't blowing his money on the horse races yet. Klinger turned pale. Ain't that a fine thing? He exclaimed, that a fellow with a responsible position like Brady should be fooling away his time at Coney Island in business hours. Abe laughed and clapped Sol Klinger on the back. As a matter of fact, Sol, he said, I ain't seen Brady in a month, you understand? But supposing Brady should come across you in an automobile down at Coney Island at 9 o'clock in the morning, you understand? I bet you he would call for a new statement from you and Klein the very next day, Sol, and make you swear to it on a truckload of Bibles already. A fella shouldn't take no chances, Sol. I was in good company anyhow, Abe, Sol declared. I was with J. Edward Kleebaum, but I suppose Morris Perlmutter told you, ain't it? Sure he did, Abe said. He also told it to me last week that you says J. Edward Kleebaum was a crook because he runs a couple of automobiles out in Minneapolis. I made a mistake about Kleebaum, Abe, Klinger interrupted. I changed my mind about him. That's all right, Sol, Abe said. But if Kleebaum was a crook last week, Sol, and a gentleman this week, what I would like to know is what will he be next week? Because I got for $2,100 an order from that fella, and I got to ship it next week. So if you got any information about Kleebaum, Sol, you would be doing me a favor if you would let me know all about it. All I know about him is this, Abe, Klinger replied. We drew on him 2 reports, and both of them gives him 50 to 75,000 credit good. He's engaged to be married to Miss Julia Pfingst, who is Joseph Pfingst's daughter. Joseph Pfingst, Abe repeated. I don't know as I ever heard that name before. It used to be Pfingst and Gusthaler, Klinger went on, in the rubber goods business on Worcester Street. First they made it raincoats, and then they went into rubber boots, and just naturally they got into bicycle tires, and then comes the automobile craze, and Gusthaler dies. And so Pfingst sells automobile tires, and now he's in the automobile business. Certainly he got there gradually, Abe commented. Maybe he did, Abe, Klinger said. But he also got pretty near $1 million, and you know as well as I do, Abe, a fellow what's a millionaire already don't got to marry off his daughter to a crook, you understand? No, Abe, I changed my mind about the fella. I think Kleebaum's a pretty decent fella, and ourselves, we sold him goods for $2,500. Abe puffed hard on his cigar for a moment. "Couldn't you get from the old man the guarantee of the account, maybe?" he asked. "I sent Klein around there this morning, Abe," Klinger answered, "and Fink says if Kleebaum is good enough to marry his daughter, he's good enough for us to sell goods to, and certainly, Abe, you couldn't blame the old man neither." Abe nodded, and a moment later he rose to leave. "You shouldn't look so worried about it, Abe," Sol Klinger said. "Everybody's selling that fella this year." "Well, Morris," Abe cried on Tuesday morning, "I gotta confess that I ain't learned nothing new about that fella Kleebaum. Everybody what I seen it speaks very highly of him, Morris, and the way I figure it, he bought goods for $50,000 in the last 4 days. Klinger and Klein sold him, Sammet Brothers sold him, and even Lapidus and Ellenbogen ain't left out. I couldn't understand it all." "Couldn't you?" Morris retorted. "Well, I could, Abe. That fella is increasing his business, Abe, because he's got good backing. You understand? He's engaged to be married to Julie Pfingst, and her father, Joseph Pfingst, is a millionaire." "Sure, I know, Morris. I've seen lots of them millionaires in my time already. Millionaires which everyone thinks is millionaires until the first meeting of creditors. And then, Morris, they make a composition, 20 cents cash and 30 cents notes at 3, 6, and 9 months. Multi-millionaires sometimes pay 25 cents cash. But otherwise, the notes is the same, like millionaires, 3, 6, and 9 months, and you could wrap up dill pickles in 'em for all good they'll do you." "What are you talking nonsense, Abe? This feller Pfingst is a millionaire. He's got a big automobile business and sells 10 cars a week at $2,500 apiece. Here it is only Tuesday, Abe, and the fella sold 2 automobiles already." "Did you count them, Morris?" Abe asked. "Sure, I counted them," Morris replied. He looked boldly into Abe's eyes as he spoke. "One of them he sold to Klinger, and the other he sold to me." If Morris anticipated making a sensation, he was not disappointed. For 10 minutes, Abe struggled to sort out a few enunciable oaths from the mass of profanity that surged through his brain, and at length he succeeded. "I always thought you was crazy, Morris," he said after the first paroxysm had exhausted itself, "and now I know it." "Why am I crazy?" Morris asked. "When a fellow lives out in Johnsonhurst, you must practically got to have an automobile. Otherwise, you're a dead one. And anyhow, Abe, could I spend my money the way I want to?" "Sure you could," Abe said. "But you didn't spend it the way you wanted to, Morris. Kleebaum got you to buy the automobile, ain't it?" "Suppose he did, Abe. Kleebaum is a customer of ours, ain't it? And he got me a special price on the car. $2,100 he will get me the car for, Abe. And Fixman looked over the car, and he says it's a great piece of work, Abe. He ain't got the slightest idea what I'm paying for the car, and he says it's well worth $2,500. Abe shrugged his shoulders. "All right, Morris," he said, "it's your funeral. Go ahead and buy the automobile. Only I tell you right now, Morris, you are sinking $2,100 cash." "Not cash, Abe," Morris corrected. "Pfingst is willing to take a 6 months note, provided it is endorsed by Potash and Perlmutter." It seemed hardly possible to Morris that more poignant emotion could be displayed than in Abe's first reception of his news, but this last suggestion almost finished Abe. For 15 minutes he fought off apoplexy, and then the storm burst. "Say, looky here, Abe," Morris protested at the first lull. "You'll make yourself sick." But Abe paused only to regain his breath, and it was at least 5 minutes before his vocabulary became exhausted. Then he sat down in a chair and mopped his brow, while Morris hastened off to the cutting room, from whence he was recalled a minute later by a shout from Abe. "By Jiminy, Morris!" he cried, slapping his knee. "I got an idea. Go ahead and buy your automobile from Pfingst, and I will agree that Potash and Perlmutter should endorse the note. You understand? Only one thing besides. Pfingst has got to guarantee to us Kleebaum's account of $2,100. I'm afraid he wouldn't do it, Abe, Morris said. All right, then I wouldn't do it neither, Abe declared. But anyhow, Morris, it wouldn't do no harm to ask him, ain't it? Where is this here feller Pfingst? At 50th Street and Broadway, Morris said. Well, looky here, Morris, Abe announced, jumping to his feet. I'm going right away and fill out some of them guarantees what Henry D. Feldman fixes up for us. And also, I will write out a note at 6 months for $2,100 and endorse it with the firm's name. Then, if he wants to, you could exchange the note for the guarantee, Morris, and we could ship the goods right away. Morris shook his head doubtfully. While Abe went into the firm's private office, he returned 5 minutes afterward, flourishing the guarantee. It read as follows. In consideration of $1 and other good and valuable considerations, I do hereby agree to pay to Potash and Perlmutter $2,100, being the amount of a purchase made by J. Edward Kleebaum from them if he fails to pay said $2,100 on May 21st, 1909. I hereby waive notice of Kleebaum's default, and Potash and Perlmutter shall not be required to exhaust their remedy against the said Kleebaum before recourse is had to me. If a petition in bankruptcy be filed by or against said Kleebaum in consideration aforesaid, I promise to pay to Potash and Perlmutter on demand the said sum of $2,100. If he signs that, Morris, Abe said, you are safe in giving him the note. Morris put on his hat and lit a cigar. I will do this thing to satisfy you, Abe, he said. But I tell you right now, Abe, it ain't necessary because Kleebaum is as good as gold. You understand? And if you don't want to ship him the goods, you don't have to. Abe grinned ironically. How could you talk like that, Morris, when the feller is doing you a favor by selling you that automobile for $2,100, he said. And besides, Morris, if we ship him the goods and he does bust up on us, Pfingst has got to pay the $2,100. And he couldn't make no claims for shortages or extra discounts neither. The idea's all right, Abe, Morris replied as he opened the showroom door, if the feller would sign it, which I don't think he would. With this ultimatum, he hastened uptown to Pfingst's warerooms, where he assured the automobile dealer that unless the guarantee was signed, there would be no sale of the car, for he flatly declined to pay cash, and Pfingst refused to accept the purchaser's note without Potash and Perlmutter's endorsement. After a lengthy discussion, Pfingst receded from his position and signed the guarantee, whereupon Morris surrendered the note and returned to his place of business. On April 21st, Potash and Perlmutter shipped Kleebaum's order, and 1 week later, Morris moved out to Johnsonhurst. 5 days after his migration to that garden spot of Greater New York, he entered the firm's showroom at 10:15. We got blocked at Flatbush Avenue this morning, he said to Abe, but Abe was paying no attention to his partner's excuses. Instead, he thrust a morning paper at Morris, and with a trembling forefinger, indicated the following scarehead. Rich girl weds own chauffeur. Pfingst family shocked by Julia's elopement. Pair reported in South. Heiress was about to wed wealthy merchant before flight occurred. What do you think of that, Morris? Abe cried. Morris read the story carefully before replying. That's a hard blow to Kleebaum and old man Pfingst, Abe, he said. I betcha, Abe replied. But he ain't near the hard blow it's going to be, so a couple of concerns what you and me know, Morris. Klinger told me only yesterday that Kleebaum would get $20,000 with that girl, Morris. And I guess he needed it, Morris. Mo Rabiner says that they got weather like January already out in Minnesota, and every retail dry goods concern is kicking that they ain't seen $1's worth of business this spring. But Kleebaum's got a tremendous following in Minneapolis, Abe, Morris said. He's got an automobile delivery system. Don't pull that on me again, Morris, Abe broke in. Women ain't buying summer garments in cold weather. just for the pleasure of seeing the goods delivered in an automobile. Which reminds me, Morris, did Finks deliver on you his automobile yet?" Morris blushed. "It was delivered yesterday, Abe," he replied. "But the fact is, Abe, I kind of changed my mind about that automobile. With automobiles, I'm a new beginner already, so I figured it out this way. Why should I go to work and try experiments with a high-priced car like a Finks car, ain't it? Now, you take a fellow like Fixman, who's already an expert, you understand? And that's something else again. Fixman tried out the car last night, Abe, and he thinks it's an elegant car. So I made an arrangement with him that he should pay me $1,500 cash, and I would swap the Finks car for a 1907 model Appalachian Runabout. That's a fine automobile, Abe, that Appalachian Runabout. In the first place, it's got a detachable tonneau and holds just as many people as the Finks car already. Only it ain't so complicated. Instead of a 6-cylinder engine, Abe, it's only got a 2-cylinder engine." "Two is enough for a start, Morris," Abe commented. "Sure," Morris agreed. "And then again, instead of a double chain drive, it's only got a single chain drive, you understand?" Abe nodded. To him, planetary and selective transmission were even as conic sections. "Also, it's got dry battery ignition, Abe," Morris concluded triumphantly, "instead of one of them new magneto arrangements, which I ain't got no confidence in at all." Abe nodded again. "I never had no confidence in Dagos neither," he said. "Fellows which couldn't speak the English language properly, understand, is bound to do you sooner or later. So Fixman and me goes around last night to see a fellow what lives out in Johnsonhurst by the name of Eleazar Levy, which Fixman got it for a lawyer, and we drew a bill of sale then and there, Abe. And Fixman give me a check for $1,500 on the Kosciuszko Bank." "Was it certified?" Abe asked. "Well, it wasn't," Morris replied, "but I stopped off at the Kosciuszko Bank this morning, and—" "You done right, Morris," Abe interrupted. "The first thing you know, Fixman would claim that the automobile ain't the same shade of red like the sample, Morris, and stops the check." "Fixman ain't that kind, Abe," Morris retorted. "The only reason I certified the check was that I happened to be in the neighborhood of the bank, because when you're at the bridge, Abe, all you got to do is take a 3rd Avenue car up Park Road to the Bowery and transfer to Grand Street. Then you ride over 10 blocks and get out at Clinton Street, you understand, and walk 4 blocks over. So long as it's so convenient, Abe, I stopped in and got it certified." "A little journey like that I would think convenient, too, if I would got to travel to Johnsonhurst every day, Morris," Abe commented. "And anyhow, Morris, in a swap, one of the fellas has always got an idea he's stuck." "Well, it ain't me, Abe," Morris protested. "And just to show you, Abe, me and Minnie wants you and Rosie. You should come out and take dinner with us on Sunday, and afterwards we can go out for a ride in the runabout." "Gott soll hüten," Abe replied piously. "What do you mean?" Morris cried. "You can come out and have dinner with us." "Sure, we will come to dinner, Morris," Abe said. "But if we want to go for a ride, Morris, a trolley car is good enough for Rosie and me." Nevertheless, the following Sunday found Abe and Rosie snugly enclosed in the detachable tonneau of the Appalachian Runabout, while Morris sat at the tiller with Minnie by his side and negotiated the easy grades of rural Long Island at the decent speed of 10 miles an hour. "Ain't it wonderful?" Abe exclaimed. "What changes come about in a couple of years already! Former times when a lodge brother died, I used to think the ride out to Cypress Hills was a pleasure already, Morris. But when I think how rotten the roads was and what poor accommodations them carriages was compared to this, Morris, I'm surprised that I could have enjoyed myself at all. This here automobile riding is something what you would really call comfortable, Morris." But Abe's observations were ill-timed, for hardly had he finished speaking when the runabout slowed down to the accompaniment of loud explosions in the muffler. Rosie's shrieks mingled with Abe's exclamations, and when at length the car came to a standstill and the explosions ceased, Abe scrambled down and helped out the half-fainting Rosie. "Any car is liable to do that," Morris explained, as Minnie searched for a bottle of liquid restorative. "I could fix it in 5 minutes." At length Minnie found the bottle in the tire box, which contained, instead of a tire, 2 dozen sandwiches, 8 cold frankfurters, some dill pickles, and a ringkuchen, for they did not contemplate returning to Johnsonhurst until long past supper time. Morris's estimate of the repair job's duration proved slightly inaccurate. He messed around with his tool bag and explored the carburetor again and again until 2 hours had elapsed without result. During this period, only a few motor cars had passed, for the road was not a popular automobile thoroughfare. At length, a large red car bore down on them, and as it came within 100 yards, it slowed down and came to a stop beside the Appalachian runabout. "Well, well," cried a familiar voice, "if this ain't the whole firm of Potash and Perlmutter." Abe looked up. "Hello, Kleebaum," he exclaimed. "I thought you was home in Minneapolis. What are you doing in New York?" "This ain't New York by about 40 miles," Kleebaum replied. He was seated at the side of a square-jawed professional chauffeur, who eyed with ill-concealed mirth Morris's very unprofessional handling of automobile tools. "Let me look at it," the chauffeur said as he climbed from his seat. He gave a hasty glance at the dry battery ignition and laughed uproariously. "Yous guys will stay here till Christmas if you expect to get that car into running condition," he said. "The only thing for yous to do is to let me give you a tow into Jamaica. They'll fix you up at the garage there." "I'm much obliged to you," Morris replied. "Don't mention it," the chauffeur went on. "I won't charge you unreasonable. $10 is my figure." "What?" Abe and Morris cried with one voice. "Why, you wouldn't charge these gentlemen nothing," Kleebaum said with a violent wink. "They're friends of mine." "I know they're friends of yours," the chauffeur replied, "and that's why I made it $10. Anywhere else I'd say 20. For almost half an hour Abe and Morris haggled with the chauffeur. They were vigorously supported by Kleebaum, who punctuated his scathing condemnation of the chauffeur's greed with a series of surreptitious winks which encouraged the latter to remain firm in his demand. Finally, Morris peeled off 2 $5 bills, and an hour later the Appalachian runabout was ignominiously hauled into a Jamaica garage. The chauffeur alighted from his car and drew the proprietor of the garage aside into his private office. "Billy," he said in a hoarse whisper, "this here baby carriage has got the oldest brand of dry battery ignition, and one of the wires has come loose from the binding screw. It'll take about a minute and a half to fix." The proprietor nodded and passed over a dollar bill. Then he sprang out onto the floor of the garage. "Ryan," he bellowed to his foreman, "get the big jack and tell Schwartz to start up the motor lathe." Then he turned to Abe and Morris. "This hill'll be 2 hours' job, gents," he said, "and I advise you to get your supper at the hotel across the street." "But how much is it going to cost?" Morris asked. For 5 minutes the proprietor figured on the back of an envelope. $15.22, he said, and Abe and Morris staggered to the street, followed by their wives. 20 minutes later, Kleebaum and the chauffeur drew up in front of a roadhouse. "Your blow," the chauffeur cried. Kleebaum nodded. "Come across with that 5 first," he said, and after the transfer had been made they disappeared into the sabbatical entrance. "Well, Morris," Abe exclaimed, when Morris entered the showroom at 10 o'clock on the next morning, "what did I tell you last week? Wasn't I right? I know you told me that one party to a swap was practically bound to get stuck, Abe," Morris admitted. "But with an automobile—" "Again automobile," Abe cried. "You got automobile in the brain, Morris. Whenever I open my mouth, Morris, you got an idea I'm going to talk about automobiles. This is something else again. Didn't you get a morning paper, Morris?" Morris shrugged. "When a fellow lives out in a place like Johnsonhurst, Abe," he replied sadly, "he's lucky if he can get a cup of coffee before he leaves the house. Our range is busted." "Something else is busted too, Morris," Abe said as he handed the morning paper to Morris. The page which contained the business troubles column was folded at the following news item: J. Edward Klebaum, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Wonder Cloak and Suit Store. J. Edward Klebaum, proprietor, was closed up by the sheriff under an execution in favor of Joseph Pfingst, who recovered a judgment yesterday in the Supreme Court for $5,800, money loaned. Klebaum is supposed to be in New York trying to make some arrangements with his creditors. Later in the day, a petition in bankruptcy was filed against him by Kugler, Jacoby, and Henk, representing the following New York creditors: Klinger and Klein, $2,500, Samet Brothers, $1,800, Lapidus and Ellenbogen, $750. Morris handed the paper back to his partner. "Well, Abe," he said, "what are you going to do about it?" "We already done it, Morris," Abe replied. "I sent down Pfingst guarantee to Henry D. Feldman at 9 o'clock already, and I told him you shouldn't wait, but if Pfingst wouldn't pay up today, yet to sue him in the courts." Morris shrugged his shoulders. "We shouldn't be in such a hurry, Abe," he said. "Pfingst treated us right, and why shouldn't we give him a chance to make good?" "Because he don't deserve it, Morris," Abe rejoined, as he started off for the showroom. "If he would have took better care of his daughter, she wouldn't run off with his here chauffeur, and Klebaum wouldn't got to fail. Also, Morris, you shouldn't talk that way neither, because if it wouldn't be for Pfingst, you wouldn't got stuck with that automobile which we rode in it yesterday." "Well, I ain't out much on it, Abe." "What do you mean you ain't out much on it?" Abe exclaimed. "It stands you $600, ain't it?" "Sure, I know," Morris replied, "but this morning I come downtown with the fella that rents us the house out in Johnsonhurst, and you never seen a fella so crazy about automobiles in all your life, Abe." "Except you, Morris," Abe broke in. "Me, I ain't so crazy about 'em no longer," Morris declared. "So I fixed it up with this fella that he should take the Appalachian runabout off my hands for $400, and he should also give me a cancellation of the lease which we got off his house. Furthermore, Abe, he pays our moving expenses back to 118th Street. Abe sat down in the nearest chair. "So you're going back to 118th Street, Morris?" he exclaimed. "Why, what's the matter with Johnsonhurst, Morris? I thought you told me Johnsonhurst was such a fine place." "So it is, Abe," Morris admitted. "The air is great out there, Abe, but at the same time, Abe, it ain't so rotten on 118th Street neither, you understand? And the train service is a whole lot better." "You're right, Morris," Abe said. "And with all these automobile rides and things, you waste too much time already. A fella should always consider business ahead of pleasure." Morris looked at his bruised and oil-stained hands. "Automobile riding," he cried. "That's a pleasure, Abe. Believe me, I'd as lief work in a rolling mill." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Potash and Perlmutter, Their Copartnership, Ventures and Adventures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Potash and Perlmutter, Their Copartnership, Ventures and Adventures by Montague Glass. Chapter 16. Morris Perlmutter's front parlor represented an eclectic taste, and the fine arts had been liberally patronized in its decoration. On the wall hung various subjects in oil, including still life, landscapes, marine scenes, and figures, all of which had been billed to Morris by a 14th Street dealer as 8 of a dozen assorted oil paintings at $96 each for $64, 8 of a dozen shadow boxes for paintings at $12 each for $8, total $72. But it was not at the oil paintings that B. Rashkin gazed. His eyes sought instead the framed and glazed certificate of membership of Morris Perlmutter in Harmony Lodge 41, Independent Order, Matai Aaron. "Them very people hold the mortgage, Mr. Perlmutter," Rashkin said, "and with the influence what you got it in the order, why—" "Looky here, Rashkin," Perlmutter interrupted, "you're a real estater, And if you don't get up at 8 o'clock, then you get up at 9. And it's all the same. But me, I'm in the cloak business. And I got to get downtown at 7 o'clock. And so I'm going to tell you again what I told you before. Go and see Abe tomorrow and put this proposition up to him like it was something you never told me nothing about. You understand? Then if he makes the suggestion to me, Rashkin, I would say all right. Because if it should be me what would make the suggestion to him, you understand, he wouldn't have nothing to do with it. And even if he should consent to go into it, and if we lost money on the deal, Rashkin, I would never hear the end of it. Rashkin nodded and seized his hat. All right, he said. I will do what you say, Mr. Perlmutter. But with them 3 lots, it's like this. They're owned by... Morris yawned, with a noise like a performing sea lion. Tell it to Potash tomorrow, Rashkin, he said, and led the way to the hall door. Accordingly, the next morning, Rashkin entered the sales room of Potash and Perlmutter, where Abe was scanning the Arrival of Buyers column in the daily cloak and suit record. Good morning, Mr. Potash, B. Rashkin said. Ain't it a fine weather? Oh, good morning, Abe cried. You don't know my face, do you? Rashkin said. I know your face, Abe said. But your name ain't familiar. I guess I seen you in Seattle, ain't it? B. Rashkin nodded. He had never been further west than Jersey City Heights. Well, how's things in Seattle, Mr. Rashkin, B. Rashkin supplied. Rashkin? Abe went on, and then he paused, but not for an answer. Rashkin. Why, I don't know one from that name in Seattle. No? Rashkin replied. Well, the fact is, Mr. Potash, I ain't come to see you about Seattle. I come to see you about 3 lots up in 264th Street. The urbane smile faded at once from Abe's face and gave place to a dark scowl. Oh, he exclaimed, a real estater. I ain't got no time to fool away with real estaters. This ain't fooling away your time, Mr. Potash, Rashkin said. Let me explain the proposition to you. Without waiting for permission, he at once divulged the object of his visit, while Abe listened with the bored air of an unemployed leading man at a professional matinee. Yes, Mr. Potash, B. Rashkin concluded, after a half an hour's conversation, I seen it bargains in my time, but these here lots is the biggest bargains yet. Vacant lots ain't never bargains, Rashkin, Abe commented. What's the use from vacant lots, anyway? A fellow what's got a vacant lot is like I would say I'm in the cloak business if only I got an empty store with nothing in it. Abe glanced proudly around him at the well-stocked racks, where the new season's goods were neatly arranged for prospective buyers. But the real estate business ain't like that cloaking business, Mr. Potash, B. Rashkin said. Real estate, Abe interrupted. Vacant lots ain't no real estate, Rashkin. Vacant lots is just imitation real estate. You couldn't say you got it real estate when you only got vacant lots. No more as a fellow who buys a gold setting could say he's got a diamond ring. Diamonds is something else again, said B. Rashkin. I ain't no judge of diamonds, Mr. Potash, but about real estate, Mr. Potash, I ain't no fool either, you understand? And these here lots, what I talk to you about, is the only 3 vacant lots in the neighborhood. Might you think that's a recommendation, maybe, Rashkin? Abe replied, but I don't. You come around here to try to sell me a couple of lots, and you got to admit yourself they're stickers. They ain't no stickers, Mr. Potash, B. Rashkin protested. No, Abe said. What's the reason they ain't stickers, Rashkin? If they ain't stickers, why ain't somebody built on them? You don't understand, B. Rashkin explained. Them lots is an estate that was in litigation, and it's only just been settled up, so that they couldn't sell them no matter who would want to buy them. Now I got 'em to entertain an offer of $83.33 apiece, or $25,000 for the 3 lots, all cash above a blanket mortgage of $10,000, held by the independent Automatai Aaron. I seen it also, Milton M. Sugarman, the attorney for the IOMA, and he tells me that they would probably be agreeable to making a building loan in them lots of $25,000 on each 37.6 front. That don't interest me none either, Abe replied. Because I ain't in the building business, Rashkin. I'm in the cloak and suit business. Sure, I know, said Rashkin. But this is an opportunity which it wouldn't occur again once in 20 years. Don't limit yourself, Rashkin, Abe retorted. Make it 50 years. It's all the same to me, because I wouldn't touch it, Rashkin. But, Mr. Potash, Rashkin broke in, if your partner, Mr. Perlmutter, would be agreeable, wouldn't you consider it? What's the use asking me hypocritical questions, Rashkin? Abe replied. Morris would no more touch it as I would. You don't know what a crank I got it for a partner, Rashkin. If I would just hint that I wanted to buy real estate, you understand that fellow would go all up in the air. And even if he would buy it with me yet, and we should lose maybe a little money, I would never hear the end of it. That's the way it goes with a fellow like Morris Perlmutter, Rashkin. B. Rashkin put on his hat and rose sadly. Well, Mr. Potash, he concluded, all I can say is you lost a splendid opportunity. Why, if I could only get a fella to take over one of them 37-6 parcels, I would buy the other one for myself and put up a fine building there. I'm sure I ain't stopping you, Rashkin, Abe said. Go ahead and build, and I wish you all the luck you could want. And if you get somebody else to take the other 1.5 lots, I wish him the same and many of them. Also, Rashkin, if I was a real estater, I would be glad to fool away my time with you, Rashkin. But being as I'm in the cloak business, You ain't going, Rashkin, are you? Rashkin answered by banging the door behind him, and Abe repaired to the cutting room where Morris Perlmutter was superintending the reception and disposal of piece goods. Who was that salesman you was talking to a while ago, Abe? He asked innocently. That wasn't no salesman, Morris. That was a loafer, Abe replied. A loafer? Morris said. He didn't look like a loafer, Abe. He looked like a real estater. Well, Morris, said Abe, to me a real estater looks like a loafer, especially, Morris, when he comes around with a bum proposition like he got it. What for a proposition was it, Abe? Morris asked. Ask me, Abe exclaimed. That real estater gives me a long story about some vacant lots and an estate and the independent order Matai Aaron and a lot more stuff what I don't believe the fellow understands about himself. But there you was talking to that real estater pretty near an hour, Abe, and you couldn't even tell it me what he wants at all? Morris protested. To tell you the truth, Morris, Abe replied, I ain't interested in what real estaters say. Real estaters, insurance canvassers, and book agents, Morris, it's all the same to me. They go in by one ear and come out the other. Why, for all you know, Abe, the fellow would have maybe some big bargains. If you're looking for bargains like that fella got at Morris, Abe retorted, you could find plenty of 'em by green goods men. If you give me my choice between gold bricks and vacant lots, Morris, I would say gold bricks. Morris turned away impatiently. Well, what do you know about real estate, Abe? He cried. Not much, Morris, Abe admitted. But I know one thing about gold bricks, Morris. You don't get to pay no taxes on 'em. That evening, B. Rashkin again presented himself at the 118th Street residence of Morris Perlmutter, and with him came Isaac Pinsky of the firm Pinsky and Gubin Architects. Mr. Pinsky had a roll of blueprints under his arm and a strong line of convincing arguments at the tip of his tongue, and the combination proved too much for Morris. Before Rashkin and Pinsky left that evening, Morris had undertaken to purchase a plot 37 feet 6 inches by 100 feet, adjacent to a similar plot to be purchased by Rashkin. Moreover, he and Rashkin engaged themselves to erect 2 houses, one on each lot, from the plans and specifications that Pinsky held under his arm. Each house was to be identical with the other in design, construction, and material, and an appointment was then and there made for noon the next day at the office of Henry D. Feldman, attorney at law, for the purpose of more formally consummating the deal. Thus, when Morris entered the showroom the next morning, it became his duty to break the news to his partner. He approached Abe with a now for it air. Well, Abe, he said. "You was wrong." "Sure I was, Morris," Abe replied amiably. "With you, I'm always wrong. What's the matter now?" "You was wrong about that feller Rashkin," Morris explained. "He was up to my house last night and put the same proposition up to me what he told it to you yesterday. And the way I figure it, Abe, we would make money on the deal." "I ain't so good on figures what you are, Morris," Abe replied. "All I can figure is I got enough to do to attend to my own business, Morris, without going into the building business." "But we wouldn't got to go into the building business, Abe," Morris protested. "All we got to do is put down $8,000 for the lot. Then the IOMA makes us a building loan of $25,000. Rashkin's got plans and specifications drawn by Pinsky and Gubin, a first-class A1 architect concern, for which he wouldn't charge us nothing. And then, Abe—" He paused to fix Abe's attention before finishing his explanation. "And then, Abe," he continued, "we hire my Minnie's brother, Ferdy, what knows the building business from A to Z, to build the house for us. All we got to do is put up the $4,000 apiece, Abe, and when the house is finished, Rashkin says we could sell it like a flash." "I never sold a flash, Morris," Abe said. "And anyhow, Morris, while I ain't saying nothing about your Minnie's family, you understand, if I would got to go into a deal with a horse thief like Ferdy Rothschild, you understand, I'd take my money first and deposit it for safety with some of them fellas up in Sing Sing. Such a show I should have at getting it back, Morris." "Looky here, Abe," Morris said. "Before you make some cracks about my Minnie's family, how about you Rosie's brother, the one what—" "It's all right, Morris," Abe broke in. "I ain't saying my wife's brother is so much neither. This is the way I feel about a fellow's wife's brother. If he got a little money, then he treats you like a dog, Morris. And if he's broke, you understand, then your wife gives him all your cigars and ties. And if you should happen to have the same size neck, Morris, then all your life you're buying collars and shirts for two. No, Morris, I ain't got no confidence in anybody's wife's brother, especially, Morris, if a fellow should make it a dirty failure like Ferdy Rothschild did, and then takes all the money and blows it on the horse races." "That's from old times already," Morris protested. "Today he's a decent, hard-working fella, Abe, and for 2 years he's been working for the Reinhold Building and Construction Company. What he don't know about putting up tenement houses, Abe, ain't worth knowing." "And what I don't know about putting up tenement houses, Morris," Abe said, "would fill one of them Carnegie libraries, Morris. And also, further, Morris, I don't want to know nothing about it neither. And also, Morris, if you should stand there and talk to me all day, it wouldn't make no difference. If you want to build tenement houses, Morris, you got my permission, but you could leave me out. I got my own troubles with cloaks." Morris rose. "All right, Abe," he said. "I give you your chance, Abe, and you wouldn't take it." "What do you mean, Morris?" Abe asked. "I mean, Abe, that I will go into this alone by myself. And the only thing I beg of you, Abe, don't come to me in 6 months' time and claim that I wouldn't let you in on a good thing. I done my best." The air of simple dignity with which Morris delivered this ultimatum was marred to some extent by a raucous laugh from Abe. "Don't do me no favors, Morris," he jeered. "All I got to say is that if I was you, Morris, I would get this here architect and B. Rashkin and also your brother-in-law Ferdy together, and I would make him an offer of settlement for, say, $3,000, Morris. Because the way I figure it out, this thing would stand you in as much money as that and a whole lot of worry, too." "You shouldn't be so generous with your advice, Abe," Morris retorted. "Oh, I don't charge you nothing for it, Morris," Abe said, as he turned to the arrival of buyers column, and for lack of appropriate rejoinder, Morris snorted indignantly and banged the showroom door behind him. For the remainder of the afternoon, Abe's face wore a malicious grin. It was there when Morris left to keep his appointment at Henry D. Feldman's office, and when he returned 4 hours later, the malice, if anything, had intensified. "Well, Morris," Abe cried, "I suppose you fixed it all up." "It don't go so quick, Abe," Morris replied. His manner was as cheerful as only that of a man who has struggled hard to repress a fit of violent profanity can be. For the meeting at Henry D. Feldman's office had been fraught with many nerve-wracking incidents. Imprimis, there had been Feldman's retainer, a generous one, and then had come the discussion of the building loan agreement with Milton M. Sugarman, attorney for the IOMA. Feldman assured Morris that it was customary for the borrower to pay the fees of the attorney for the lender. Incidental to drawing and recording the necessary papers, and Morris had also learned that the high premiums of insurance for the building to be erected would come out of his pocket. Moreover, he had seen B. Rashkin credited with commissions for bringing about Morris's purchase of the lot, and for the first time he had ascertained that he also owed B. Rashkin $250 commission for procuring a building loan from the IOMA. So far, he reckoned that his investment exceeded B. Rashkin's by $1,000, and when he considered that B. Rashkin would be his own superintendent of construction, while he, Morris, would be obliged to hire Ferdy Rothschild at a compensation of $750 to perform that same office for him, Abe's advice appeared too sound to be pleasant. "No, Abe," he said, "it don't go so quick. I got another appointment for next week." Abe grunted. "All I got to say, Morris," he commented, "you shouldn't forget you are a partner in a cloak and suit business." "Don't worry," Morris replied. "You wouldn't let me forget that, Abe." He strode off toward the cutting room, and once more Abe resumed his fixed grin. It must be confessed that through the entire 6 months of his building operations, Morris maintained a stoic calm that effectually hid the storm raging within his breast. All the annoyances incidental to building a house were heaped on Morris, and both he and Rashkin equally suffered petty blackmail at the hands of the attorney and the architect for the building loan mortgagee. In the meantime, Abe's grin gained in breadth and malice, and on more than one occasion Morris had foregone the pleasure of assaulting his partner only by the exercise of remarkable self-control. "Do me the favor, Abe," he said at length, "and let me in on this joke." "It ain't no joke, Morris," Abe replied. "I thought you found that out already." "If you mean the house, Abe," Morris answered, "all I got to say is that there should be any joke about it, Abe, the joke is on you, for the house is pretty near finished." "I'm glad to hear it, Morris," Abe said. "I suppose Ferdy Rothschild did a good job on the house." "Sure he did," Morris said. "He didn't get no rake-offs from material men or nothing, Morris, what?" Abe asked. "Rake-offs!" Morris cried. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, I seen it Gusserow, the glass man, on the subway last night, Morris," Abe explained, "and he says that for every pane of glass what went into your house, Morris, Ferdy Rothschild gets his rake-off." "Well, what do I care?" Morris retorted. "If Gusserow could stand it, Abe, I can." "Gusserow can stand it all right, Morris," Abe said reassuringly. "All he's got to do is put it on the bill." "Well, if he put it on my bill, Abe," Morris replied, "he also put it on Rashkin's bill, because him and me bought the same building material all the way through, and I wouldn't pay no bills till I saw that Rashkin don't get charged less as I do." This was conclusive, and Abe's grin relaxed for several inches. Nor did it resume its normal width until some days later, when Morris began to negotiate for his permanent mortgage loan. Once Morris remonstrated with him for his levity. "Must you go around looking like a crazy idiot, Abe?" "I must got to laugh, Morris," Abe protested. "When I seen it Sam Feder at the Kosciuszko Bank this morning, and he tells me you got a permanent mortgage from IOMA, he says Milton M. Sugarman told you got it ahead of Rashkin because you got influence as a lodge brother of Sugarman." "Sure I did," Morris admitted. "And then, Morris," Abe went on, "Rashkin hears that the IOMA is going to make you a permanent loan, so he goes to see Sugarman too." "That's right," Morris agreed. And he says to Sugarman that so long as Sugarman has got to search the title to your house, he wouldn't have to search the title to Rashkin's house, because both homes stand on the same piece of property. So he makes a proposition that if Sugarman would charge him only $100, he would put in an application by the IOMA for a permanent loan. Otherwise, he would get it from a life insurance company. Morris nodded ironically. And Sugarman says he would do it, I suppose. He broke in. No, Abe, Sugarman ain't built that way. It cost me $500 for that loan, Abe. I know it did, Morris, Abe said. And Fader says that Sugarman told him he charges you $500, and so he don't want to be a hog, Morris, and therefore he closes with Rashkin for $150. Morris's jaw dropped, and he stared at Abe. Furthermore, Morris, Abe went on, Rashkin comes in to see Fader the other day and tells Fader he will be glad to make a quick turn, and he tells Fader that house stands him in $8,000 cash, and he will be glad to sell it for $44,500, all cash, above the new first mortgage of $33,000. Morris nodded. But Abe, he croaked, how could he do that? Reckoning all the mortgages and everything, and what I invested and paid out for building material over and above the building loan, the house stands me in just $11,250 cash. If I would come out even on that house, I got to sell it for $45,750, and I reckoned on $47,000 as a fair price for the house. Sure you did, Abe said cheerfully. And how that fellow Rashkin can claim that his house stands him in $8,000 cash is more as I can understand, Abe, Morris said, because while I know I spent it for commissions and for Ferdy Rothschild a couple of thousand more as Rashkin, Abe, our building material cost the same, Abe. Sure it did, on the bills, Morris, Abe replied. But Gusserow says that of course he don't know nothing about the other material men, but when he sends the bill to you, he also sends the same bill to Rashkin. When you send him a check for your bill, Ferdy Rothschild gets 5%. Also, Rashkin sends Gusserow a check for his bill with 5% discount, and Ferdy Rothschild smears Rashkin a $20 note, and that's the way that goes. Morris sat down in the nearest chair and blinked helplessly at Abe. What do you think for a couple of crooks like that, Abe? He croaked. What do I think, Morris? Abe repeated. I think that one of them is a brother-in-law, Morris, and the other is a real estater, Morris, and that's a bad combination. But I can make him arrested, Abe, Morris declared, and by Jiminy, I will do it, too. Abe shrugged. You couldn't do that, Morris, he said, because in the first place, Morris, your Minnie wouldn't stand for it, and in the second place, them two fellas would fix up a fine story between them, and the judge would let him go. And then, Morris, they would turn around and go to work on you, sue you for false arresting, and the first thing you know, Morris, it would stand you in a couple of $1,000s more. Morris nodded sadly. I believe you're right, Abe, he murmured. Sure I'm right, Morris, Abe said. And also, Morris, while I wouldn't want to say nothing to make you feel worse already, I got to say, Morris, that if you would believe me I was right 6 months ago yet, you wouldn't got to believe I was right now. Morris nodded again. He was thoroughly crushed, and he looked so appealingly at his partner that Abe was unable to withhold his comfort and advice. Looky here, Morris, he said. A fellow's got to make a mistake sometimes, ain't it? And if he didn't get stuck for a couple of $1,000s once in a while, he wouldn't know the value of his money, ain't it? But as this stands now, Morris, I got an idea you ain't stuck so bad as what you think. No? Morris said. Why ain't I, Abe? Well, Morris, I'll tell you, Abe began, with no clear conception of how he would finish. You know me, Morris, I ain't a fellow that's got a whole lot to say for myself, but I ain't got such bad judgment neither, Morris. I seen fellows with worse judgment as you, Abe, Morris said. Abe could not forbear a stare of astonishment at this grudging admission. At least you got to admit it, Morris, he cried. But anyway, Morris, go ahead and finish up this here permanent mortgage loan business, and then, Morris, I will do all I can to help you out. Morris rose to his feet. Well, Abe, he began in shaking tones, I must got to say that looky here, Morris. Abe broke in savagely. Ain't me fooled away enough time here this morning? Just because you got your troubles with this here building, Morris, ain't no reason why we shouldn't attend to business, Morris. He handed Morris a black cigar, and as they started for the cutting room floor, they gave vent to their pent-up emotions in great clouds of comforting smoke. The next fortnight was fraught with so many disagreeable experiences for Morris that he appeared to age visibly, and once more Abe was moved to express his sympathy. "You shouldn't take on so, Morris," he said the morning after the permanent loan was closed. "The first thing you know, Morris, you'll be getting a nervous breakup already." "I bet you I'd be getting a nervous breakup, Abe," Morris agreed. "If you would be me, Abe, you would get a nervous breakup too. In the first place, Abe, I got to pay them suckers, them architects, Pinsky and Gubin, $100 before they would give it to me their final certificate. And then, Abe, I got to schmear at a fella in the tenement house department, another $100. And then, Abe, I told them two crooks what I thought of 'em, Abe. And you ought to hear the way the horse thief talks back to me already." "Horse thief?" Abe said. "Which one, Morris?" "That Ferdy Rothschild, Abe," Morris continued. "So sure as I stand here, Abe, if that feller wouldn't be my wife's brother, I would make it for him a couple of blue eyes he wouldn't forget so quick." "With a fellow like that, Morris," Abe said, "you shouldn't bother yourself at all. If you make a low-life bum a couple of blue eyes, he will make you also a couple of blue eyes, maybe. And that's all there is to it, Morris. But when you make it a crook like Ferdy Rothschild a couple of blue eyes, then that's something else again. Such a schwindler like him, Morris, would turn right around and see you in the courts yet for damages, and the first thing you know, you're stuck for a couple of $1,000. "Well, I'm through with him anyhow," Morris replied, "so we wouldn't talk no more about him. A dirty dog like him, mate, he ain't worth a—" He was searching his mind for a sufficiently trivial standard of comparison when Abe interrupted him. "I thought you wasn't going to talk about him, Morris," he said. "And anyhow, Morris, what's the use talking about things what is past already? What we got to do now, Morris, is to sell that house." "I know it, Abe," Morris replied ruefully. "But how are we going to sell that house with B. Rashkin going around offering to sell the identical same house for $44,500? If I'd be lucky enough to get $45,750 for mine, Abe, I would still be out several $100s." "You talk foolish, Morris. You'll get $47,000 sure for that house." "Would I?" Morris cried. "How would I do that?" "Leave that to me," Abe replied. He put on his hat and coat. "Where you going, Abe?" Morris asked. Abe waggled his head solemnly. "You shouldn't ask me, Morris," he said. "I got an idea." It was 11:45 when Abe left the loft building on 19th Street, and he repaired immediately to the real estate sales room on Vesey Street, where auction sales of real estate are held at noon daily. To this center of real estate activity comes every real estate broker on the East Side, together with his brothers from Harlem and the Bronx, and Abe felt reasonably sure that B. Rashkin would be on hand. Indeed, he had hardly entered the salesroom when he descried B. Rashkin standing on the outskirts of a little throng that surrounded the rostrum of a popular auctioneer. "Now, gentlemen," said the auctioneer, "what am I offered for the 6-story 4-family house? Remember, gentlemen, it is practically new and stands on a lot 40 by 100. "40,000, said a voice at Abe's elbow. "Come, gentlemen," the auctioneer cried. "We ain't making you a present of this house exactly. Do I hear 41? Thank you, sir, at 41, at 41, at—" Abe sidled up to B. Rashkin, and in firm tones he made the next bid. "41.5, he said. "41.5, the auctioneer repeated, and B. Rashkin turned to look at the bidder. He started visibly as he recognized Abe, who bowed coldly. "Why, hello, Mr. Potash," Rashkin exclaimed. "I didn't know you was in the market for property." "Why not?" Abe said. "Well, on account you got a partner who—" "You don't get to rub it in, Mr. Rashkin," Abe interrupted. "If my partner did know a good thing when he seen it, Mr. Rashkin, I don't need to be reminded of it." "A good thing?" Rashkin said in puzzled accents. "Why, I ain't—" He stopped in time and forced himself to smile amiably. Yes, Mr. Rashkin, Abe went on, as he imperceptibly edged away from the crowd. Would you believe it, that fella tells me this morning he's already got a fine offer for the house? You don't tell me, Rashkin said as they approached one of the salesroom doors. He, too, was edging away from the crowd, and congratulated himself that Abe had made no further bid. I'm glad he should get it. For my part, Mr. Potash, I would be glad to sell you my house, too. Here he made a rapid mental calculation and arrived approximately at the price that would yield Morris a profit. I had myself an offer of $46.75 for my house, Mr. Potash, he hazarded. Abe was ostentatiously surprised. So, he said, with an elaborate assumption of recovering his composure. Yes, Mr. Potash, Rashkin went on. He was beginning to feel that the figure was too low. That's the offer I received, and I wouldn't take a cent less than 48. Let me see, Abe mused, as they paused in front of a bakery and luncheon a few doors down the street. You got a first mortgage, $33,000, and that would give you a pretty big equity there, Mr. Rashkin. Wouldn't you come inside and take maybe a cup of coffee, Mr. Potash? Rashkin suggested. I shouldn't mind if I will, Abe said, and they entered the bakery together. Would you want all cash above the mortgage, Mr. Rashkin? Just now, Mr. Potash, Rashkin replied. I want a little something to eat. Give me a piece of Stalin and a cup of coffee. Milk separate? The waitress asked. B. Rashkin nodded haughtily and then turned to Abe. What will you have, Mr. Potash? He asked. Give me also a cup of coffee and a tongue sandwich, he announced to the waitress. White or rye bread? Said the waitress. Rye bread, Abe replied. We ain't got no rye bread. I can give you a roll sandwich, she declared solemnly. All right, give me a rolled tongue sandwich, Abe concluded, and once more addressed B. Rashkin. Of course you would take back a second mortgage, Mr. Rashkin, he said. Well, I might take $2,000 or $3,000, a purchase money mortgage maybe, but no more, Rashkin replied as the waitress returned empty-handed. Rolls is all out, she said. I have to give you white bread. All right, Abe replied. Did you say Swiss cheese or store cheese? She inquired mildly. Tongue! Abe and B. Rashkin roared with one voice. Well, don't get mad about it, the waitress cried, as she whisked away toward the coffee urns. I'll tell you the truth, Mr. Potash, B. Rashkin continued. I give that house to a number of real estaters already, and I'm considering a good offer from a fellow what Ferdy Rothschild brings me. The fellow makes me a fine offer, Mr. Potash, only he wants me to take back a second mortgage of $5,000, and I told Ferdy Rothschild if he can get his customer to make it all cash above a second mortgage of $3,000, I would consider it. Ferdy says he expects his customer in to see him this afternoon already, and he will let me know before I go home tonight. In this rare instance, B. Rashkin was undergoing the novel experience of speaking the truth, only slightly modified, for that very morning Ferdy Rothschild had produced a purchaser who was willing to pay $46,000 for Rashkin's house. The deal the purchaser proposed to consummate by taking the property subject to a first mortgage of $33,000 by executing a second mortgage of $7,000 and by paying the $6,000 balance of the purchase price in cash. B. Rashkin had told Ferdy that if the customer would agree to pay $8,500 in cash and to reduce the second mortgage proportionately, the deal would be closed, and Ferdy had promised to let him know during the afternoon. Looky here, Rashkin, Abe said at length, what's the use beating bushes around? You know as well as I do that me and my partner don't get along very well, and I would like to teach that sucker a lesson, that he shouldn't monkey no more with real estate. You understand? I'll tell you right now, Rashkin, I would be willing to lose maybe a couple of $100 if I could get that house from you and sell it to the fellow that makes the offer to Morris Perlmutter. You and Perlmutter must be pretty good friends together, Rashkin commented. But anyhow, I'm perfectly willing to help you all I can, because when a fellow practically calls you a bloodsucker and a horse thief, Mr. Potash, naturally you don't feel too friendly toward him. But one thing I gotta say, Mr. Potash, and that is I couldn't sell my house for a penny less than $48,000. Abe put down his cup of coffee and stared at Rashkin. That's a lot of money, Mr. Rashkin, Abe said, and that would mean pretty near 12,000 cash. B. Rashkin nodded calmly, and Abe pondered for a moment. Well, Rashkin, Abe said, I'm willing I should spend some money, you understand? And so I'd make you this offer. Would you give me an option on the house at $48,000 for 2 weeks, supposing I paid you, we will say, $200? Rashkin shook his head. Will we say then $250? Abe said, but Rashkin declined. Immediately they commenced to bargain vigorously, and at intervals of 5 minutes each modified his price for the option until half an hour had expired, when they met at $400. All right, B. Rashkin cried. Let us go and see Milton M. Sugarman and draw up the option. I'm agreeable, Abe said. Any lawyer can draw it up, so far as I'm concerned. They rose from the table without leaving the customary nickel for the waitress, and as they passed out the door, she glared after them and indignantly adjusted her pompadour with both hands. Pipe them too, high livers, she hissed to the waitress at the next table. I knew them guys was going to pass me up as soon as I laid me eyes on 'em. She heaved a tremendous sigh. You ought to heard the roar they put up about a tongue sandwich, she said. Ain't it funny, Kitty, how tightwads is always fussy about their feed? When Abe returned to his place of business a couple of hours later, he found Morris adding up figures on the back of an envelope. Well, Abe, Morris cried, what's new about the house? I'll tell you what's new, Morris, Abe replied. Just add $400 to them figures on that envelope, and you'll find out what that house cost you up to date. What do you mean? Never mind what I mean, Morris, Abe said. I'll tell you later what I mean. The thing is now, Morris, I got to know one thing, and I got to know it quick. Where would I find this here low-life brother-in-law of yours? Let me see, said Morris. It's already 2 o'clock, so I guess, Abe, you would be liable to get him in the back room of the Wasserbauer's Cafe. Him and a fella by the name Feinson and that low-life Rabiner plays their auction pinochle together. But ain't he got no office, Morris? Abe asked. Sure he's got an office, Morris replied. He's got a desk room with a couple of real estaters on Liberty Street, Abe. Look him up in the telephone book. He's got a phone put in there too, Abe, with my money, I bet you. Abe consulted the telephone book and again put on his hat. Where you going now, Abe? Morris asked. I'm going down to Ferdy Rothschild's office, Abe replied. But you wouldn't find him in, Abe, Morris protested. I hope not, Abe replied. And for the second time that day he left his place of business and boarded a downtown L train. Ferdy Rothschild's office was tucked away in an obscure corner of a small office building on Liberty Street, and as Abe plodded wearily up 3 flights of stairs, he overtook a short, stout gentleman headed in the same direction. A fellow that's got his office on the top floor of a back-number building like this, said the exhausted traveler, should keep at airships for his customers. I betcha, Abe gasped as they reached the landing together, and then in silence they walked side by side to the office of Ferdy Rothschild. Abe opened the door and motioned his companion to enter first, whereas the stranger nodded politely and walked into the office. Is Mr. Rothschild in? He said to the office boy, who was the sole occupant of the room. Mr. Rothschild now telephoned, the boy replied, and he says now that if a guy comes in by the name of Marks to tell him he should wait. Did he say he would be right in? Mr. Marks asked. No, the boy answered, but he'll be in soon, all right. How do you know that? Abe asked. Because now I heard him tell the other boys that he wouldn't set no longer time limit, the boy replied, but he says he'd play 4 more deals and then he'd quit, see? Mr. Marks looked at Abe and broke into a laugh. That's a fine low life for you, he said. That fella tells me I should be here at 3 o'clock sharp, and he fools away my time like this. Abe nodded. What could you expect from a fellow like that? Abe commenced, and then broke off suddenly. But excuse me, he may be a friend of yours. Gott soll hüten, Mr. Marks replied piously. All I got to do with him is that he brings me a proposition I should buy a piece of property, which he got it to sell. That's a funny thing, Abe said. I came here myself about a piece of property what I just bought, and I understand he tried to sell the property for the fellow what I bought it from. Abe took the option from his breast pocket and opened it on his knee, while Mr. Marks glanced at it furtively, not unnoticed by Abe, who aided his companion's inspection by spreading out the paper until its contents were plainly visible. "Why," Mr. Marks cried, "why, that is the house what this here Rothschild said he would sell at me." Abe looked up sharply. "You don't say so," he said. "How could he sell you that house when I got this here option on it this morning for $48,000? $48,000? Mr. Marks exclaimed. "Why, he says I could buy it for $46,000. Abe laughed with forced politeness. "Well, if you could get it for $46,000, you should have took it," he said. "I want $49,000 for it." It was now Mr. Marks' turn to laugh. "You couldn't get $49,000 for that house," he said, "if the window panes was diamonds already." "No," Abe retorted. "Well, then I'll keep it, Mr. Marks," suggested Mr. Marks. "Marks," Abe went on. "I'll keep it, Mr. Marks, until I can get it, so sure as my name is Abe Potash." "Of Potash and Perlmutter?" Mr. Marks asked. "That's my name," Abe said. "Why, then your partner owns yet the house next door," Mr. Marks cried. "That ain't no news to me, Mr. Marks," Abe said. "In fact, he built that house, Mr. Marks, and I got so tired hearing about the way that house rents and how much money he's going to get out of it that I bought the place next door myself." "But ain't that a funny thing that one partner should build a house and the other partner shouldn't have nothing to do with it?" Mr. Marks commented. "We was partners in cloaks, Mr. Marks, not in houses," Abe explained. "And I had my chance to go in with him, and I was a big fool I didn't took it." Mr. Marks rose to his feet. "Well, all I can say is," he rejoined, "if I got it a partner and was able to consider a proposition of building, Mr. Potash, we would go together, not separate." "Yes, Mr. Marks," Abe agreed. "If you had it a partner, Mr. Marks, that would be something else again. But the partner what I got it, Mr. Marks, you got no idea what an independent fellow that is. I can assure you, Mr. Marks, that fellow don't let me know nothing what he's doing outside of our business. For all I would know, he might have sold his house already." "You don't mean to say that his house is on the market, do you?" Marks said sharply. "I don't mean to say nothing," Abe replied, as he started to leave. "All I meant to say is I'm tired of waiting for that low-life Rothschild, and I must get back to my store." "Wait a bit. I'll go downstairs with you," Marks broke in. As they walked down to the elevated road, they exchanged further confidences, by which it appeared that Mr. Marks was in the furniture business on 3rd Avenue, and that he lived on Lenox Avenue near 116th Street. "Why, you're practically a neighbor of Morris Perlmutter," Abe cried. "Is that so?" Mr. Marks said, as they reached the elevated railway. "Yes," Abe went on. "He lives on 118th Street and Lenox Avenue." "You don't say so," Mr. Marks replied. "Well, Mr. Potash, I got to leave you here." They shook hands, and after Abe had proceeded halfway up the steps to the station platform, he paused to observe Mr. Marks penciling in an address in his memorandum book. When he again entered his showroom, Morris had just hung up the telephone receiver. "Yes, Abe," he said. "You gone and stuck your feet in it all right." "What do you mean?" Abe asked. "Ferdy Rothschild just rung me up," Morris explained, "and he says you went down to his office while he was out, and you seen it there a fellow what he was going to sell Rashkin's house to, and you went and broke up the deal, and that he will sue you yet in the courts." "Let him sue us," Abe said. "All he knows about is what the office boy tells him. I didn't break up no deal, because there wasn't no deal to bust up, Morris." "Why not?" Morris asked. "Because if the deal was to sell Rashkin's house," Abe explained, "Rothschild ain't in it at all, because I myself is the only person what could sell that house." He drew the option from his breast pocket and handed it to Morris, who read it over carefully. "Well, Abe," Morris commented, That's only throwing away good money with bad, because you couldn't do nothing with that house in 2 weeks or in 2 years yet, neither." "I know it," Abe said confidently, "but so long as I got an option on that house, nobody else couldn't do nothing with it, neither. And so long as Rashkin ain't able to undersell you, Morris, you get a chance to get rid of your house and come out even, Morris. My advice to you, Morris, that you should get a hustle on and you sell that house for the best price you could. For so sure as I sit here, after this option expires and Rashkin is again offering his house at $45,000, you would be positively stuck." "I bet you I'd be stuck, Abe," Morris agreed. "But I ain't going to let no grass grow on me, Abe. I'll put in an ad in every paper in New York this afternoon, and I'll keep it up till I sell the house." "Maybe that won't be necessary, Morris," Abe said with a twinkle in his eye. "What do you mean?" Morris asked. Whereupon Abe unfolded at great length his adventures of the day, beginning with his meeting B. Rashkin at the real estate exchange and concluding with Mr. Marks's penciled memorandum of Morris's address. "And now, Morris," Abe concluded, "you seen the position what I took it, and when that feller Marks calls at your house tonight, you should be careful and not make no cracks. Remember, Morris, you got to tell him that as a partner I'm a crank and a regular highbinder. Also, Morris, you got to tell him that if I wasn't held by a copartnership agreement, I would do you for your shirt. You understand?" Morris nodded. "I know you should, Abe," he said. "What?" Abe roared. "I mean, I know I should," Morris explained. "I know I should tell this here Marks what you say." Abe grew calm immediately, but he left further tactics to Morris's discretion. And when Mr. Marks called at the latter's house that evening, Morris showed that he possessed the discretion to a degree hardly equaled by his partner. "Yes, Mr. Marks," he said, after he had seated his visitor in the easiest chair in the front parlor and had supplied him with a good cigar, "it is true that I got at a house and that the house is on the market for sale." He paused and nodded sadly. "But I also got it a partner, Mr. Marks, and no doubt you heard already what a cutthroat that feller is. I assure you, Mr. Marks, that feller goes to work and gets an option on the house next door, which you know is identical, the same like my house is. Yes, Mr. Marks, he gets an option on that house for $47,500 from the feller what owns it, when he knows I am already negotiating to sell my house for $47,750. This willful misstatement of the amount of the option produced the desired result. "Did you seen it, the option?" Marks asked cautiously. "Well, no, I ain't seen it, but I heard it on good authority, Mr. Marks," he said, and allowed himself 2 bars rest, as the musicians say, for the phrase to sink in. "Yes, Mr. Marks, on good authority I heard it that Potash paid $500 for a 2 weeks option at $47,500. $47,500? Marks said with a rising inflection. $47,500, Morris repeated blandly. "And I guess he got a pretty cheap house, too." "Well, I ain't got the same opinion what you got," Marks retorted. "I got an opinion, Mr. Perlmutter, that your partner pays $1,000 too much for his house." "Is that so?" Morris replied. And then and there began a 3-hour session which terminated when they struck a bargain at $47,000. 10 minutes later, Marks left with a written memorandum of the terms of the sale on his person, while Morris pocketed a similar memorandum and $50 earnest money. The next morning, an executory contract of sale was signed in Henry D. Feldman's office, and precisely 2 weeks later, Mr. Marks took title to Morris's property, which, after deducting all expenditures, netted its builder a profit of almost $2,000. This sum Morris deposited to the credit of the firm account of Potash and Perlmutter, and hardly had the certified check been dispatched to the Kosciuszko Bank when the door opened and Rashkin and Ferdy Rothschild burst into the showroom. "Bloodsucker!" Rashkin cried, shaking his fist under Abe's nose. "What for you didn't take up your option?" Abe stepped back hurriedly and put a sample table between himself and B. Rashkin. "Must I take it up, the option?" he said calmly. Couldn't I let you keep it, the $400, if I wanted to? Rashkin looked at Ferdy Rothschild. That's a fine murderer for you, what? He exclaimed. Him I ain't surprised about, Ferdy Rothschild replied, but when a fellow should do his own wife's brother out of a commission of $465, Rashkin, what a heart he must have it, like a piece of steel. Don't talk that way, Ferdy, Morris commented, without emotion. You make me feel bad. I got lots of consideration for you, Ferdy, after the way you treated me already. Yes, Ferdy, I think a whole lot of you, Ferdy. You come to me with your tongue hanging out from hunger yet, and I wouldn't lift a little finger. Ferdy turned and appealed to B. Rashkin. Ain't them fine words to hear from my own brother-in-law? He said. Nobody compels you to stay here and listen to him, Rothschild, Abe interrupted. And anyhow, Rothschild, you can make it more money if instead you stayed here, you go downtown to Henry D. Feldman's office and sue this here Rashkin in the courts for your commission. I was telling Feldman all about it this morning. He says you got it a good case. Rothschild, Rashkin cried pleadingly, where are you going? You shouldn't talk to me, Rothschild answered. Potash is right. I brought this here Marks to you, and he was ready and willing to purchase at your terms, and so therefore you owe me a commission of $465. The next moment he banged the door behind him, and 5 minutes later he was followed by B. Rashkin, who had filled that short space of time with an exhaustive and profane denunciation of Potash and Perlmutter individually and as co-partners. 5 days afterward, Morris examined the list of real estate conveyances in the morning paper, after the fashion of the reformed racetrack gambler who occasionally consults the past performances of the day's entries. He handed the paper to Abe and pointed his finger to the following item: 264th Street, 2044 East, 37.6 by 100.10, Baruch Rashkin to the Royal Piccadilly Realty Company, mortgage $33,000, $100. That's only a fake, Abe said. I seen it in the paper yesterday that Rashkin incorporated the Royal Piccadilly Realty Company with his wife, Goldie Rashkin, as president. And I guess he done it because he got scared that Rothschild would get a judgment against him, and so he transfers the house to the corporation. But if he does that, Abe, Morris cried gleefully, Ferdy Rothschild would never collect on that judgment, because that house is all the property Rashkin's got. I hope you don't feel bad about it, Morris, Abe said. I bet you I feel terrible, Abe, Morris said ironically. But why did Rashkin call it the Royal Piccadilly Realty Company, Abe? For the sake of old times yet, Abe answered. I hear it from Saul Klinger that before Rashkin busted up in the waist business, he used to make up a garment called the Royal Piccadilly. Is that so? Morris commented. I never heard he busted up in the waist business, Abe. Why couldn't he make a go of it, Abe? Well, Morris, it was the same trouble with him like with some other people I know, Abe replied significantly. He was a good manufacturer, but a poor salesman. And you know as well as I do, Morris, any fool could make up an article, Morris, but it takes a feller with judgment to sell it. End of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Potash and Perlmutter, Their Copartnership Ventures and Adventures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MaryAnn. Potash and Perlmutter, Their Copartnership Ventures and Adventures by Montague Glass. Chapter 17. Did the sponger send up them doctors yet? Said Morris, with a faraway look in his bloodshot eyes, as he entered his place of business at 7:30 one morning in March. Doctors? Abe repeated. What are you talking about, doctors? Morris snapped his fingers impatiently. Doctors. Hear me talk. I meant Kersey's. Listen here, Morris, Abe suggested. What's the use of you monkeying with business today? Why don't you go home? Me? I don't take things so particular, Abe, Morris replied. Time enough when I got to go home. Then I will go home. You could do what you please, Morris, Abe declared. We ain't so busy now that you couldn't be spared, you'll understand. With spring weather like we got it now, Morris, we could better sell Arctic overshoes and raincoats as try and get rid of our line already. I tell you the truth, Morris, I ain't seen business so schlecht since way before the Spanish War already." "We could always find something to do, Abe," said Morris. "Why don't you tell Miss Cohen to get out them statements which you was talking about?" "That's a good idee, Morris," Abe agreed. "Half the time we don't know where we are at all. Big concerns get out what they call a balancing sheet every day yet, and we are lucky if we do it once a year already. How long you think it would take her to finish them up, Morris?" The faraway look returned to Morris's eyes as he replied, "I am waiting for a telephone every minute, Abe," he said. Abe stared indignantly at his partner. Then he took a cigar out of his waistcoat pocket and handed it to Morris. "Go and sit down and smoke this, Morris," he said. "Leon Sammet gives it to me in the subway this morning, and if it's anything like them souvenirs which he hands out to his customers, it'll make you forget your troubles, Morris. The last time I smoked one, I couldn't remember nothin' for a week." Morris carefully cut off the end of Abe's gift with a penknife, but when he struck a match the telephone bell rang sharply. Immediately he threw the cigar and the lighted match to the floor and dashed wildly to the firm's office. "Do you got to burn up the place yet?" Abe cried, and after he had extinguished the match with his foot, he followed his partner to the office in time to view Morris's coat tails disappearing into the elevator. For 2 minutes he stood still and shook his head slowly. "Miss Cohen," he said at length, "get out them statements which I told it you yesterday, and so soon you got the drawing account finished, let me have it. I don't think Mr. Perlmutter will be back today, so you would have lots of time to do it in." It was almost 2 o'clock before Miss Cohen handed Abe the statement of the firm's drawing account, and Abe thrust it into his breast pocket. "I'm going out for a bite, Miss Cohen," he said. "If anybody wants me, I am over at Hammersmith's, and you could send Jake across for me." He sighed heavily as he raised his umbrella and plunged out into a heavy March downpour. It had been raining steadily for about a week, to the complete discouragement of garment buyers, and Hammersmith's rear café sheltered a proportionately gloomy assemblage of cloak and suit manufacturers. Abe glanced around him when he entered, and selected a table at which sat Sol Klinger, who was scowling at a portion of Salisbury steak. "Hello, Sol," Abe cried. "What's the trouble? Ain't the ointermobile running again?" "Do me the favor, Abe," Sol replied, "and cut out them so-called alleged jokes." He turned toward a waiter who was dusting off the tablecloth in front of Abe. "Max," he said, stabbing at the steak with a fork held at arm's length and leaning back in his chair as though to avoid contagion, "what do you call this here mess, anyway?" The waiter examined the dish critically and nodded his head. "Salisbury steak, Mr. Klinger," he muttered. "Very nice today." "Is that so?" Sol Klinger rejoined. "Well, looky here, Max. If I would got it a dog, which I wanted to get rid of bad, you understand, I would feed him that mess. But me, I ain't ready to die just yet a while, you understand, even though business is rotten. So you could take that thing back to the cook and bring me a slice of roast beef. And if you think I got all day to sit here, Max, and fool away my time—" "Right away, Mr. Klinger, right away," Max cried, as he hurried off the offending dish, and once more Sol subsided into a melancholy silence. "Don't take it so hard, Sol," Abe said. "We got bad weather like this shown lots of times yet, and none of us busted up, ain't it?" "The weather is nix, Abe," Sol replied. "If it's wet today, then it's fine tomorrow, and if a concern ain't buying goods now, all right, they'll buy 'em later on, ain't it? But, Abe, the partner which you got it today, Abe, that's the same partner which you got it tomorrow, and that sucker Klein, Abe, he eats me up with expenses. What that feller does with his money, Abe, I don't know." "Maybe he buys oitermobiles, Sol," Abe suggested. "Supposing I did buy last spring an oitermobile, Abe," Sol retorted. "That's the least. I bet yer that feller Klein spends enough on taxicab rides for customers, and also 1 or 2 of 'em which she ain't customers, as he could buy a dozen oitermobiles already. No, Abe, that ain't the point. The first year Klein and me goes as partners together he overdraws me $250. Schon gut. If the feller is a little extravagant, you understand, he's got to make it up next year." Sol paused to investigate the roast beef which Max had brought, and being apparently satisfied, he proceeded with his narrative. Next year, Abe," he continued, "Klein not only ain't made up the 250, Abe, but he gets into me $300 more. Well, business is good, you understand, and so I don't kick, and that's where I am a great big fool, Abe, because every year since then, Abe, that sucker goes on, until today our balance sheet shows I got 5,000 more invested in the business as Klein got it. And if I would tell him we are no longer equal partners, Abe, he would go right down to Henry D. Feldman, and tomorrow morning there would be a receiver in the store." Saul plunged his fork into the slice of roast beef as though it were Klein himself, and he hacked at it so viciously that the gravy flew in every direction. "Max," he roared, clapping his handkerchief to his face, "what the devil you are bringing me here? Soup?" It was at least 5 minutes before Saul had exhausted his stock of profanity, and when at length the tablecloth was changed, and Abe had ministered to the front of his coat with a napkin dipped in water, Saul ceased to upbraid the waiter, and resumed his tirade against his partner. "Yes, Abe," he said, "you are in luck. You got a partner, you understand, which he is a decent, respectable feller. I bet your Mawruss would no more dream of overdrawing you than he would fly in the air." "Wait till he gets to be popular, Saul," Abe replied. "You could take it from me, Saul, Morris would be the first one to buy one of them airyplanes, just the same like he bought that oitermobile yet." "That's all right," Saul said. "Morris is a good live partner. He sees people round him, good, decent, respectable people, mind you, is buying oitermobiles, Abe, and so he thinks he could buy one too. There ain't no harm in that, Abe, so long as he keeps inside his drawing account. But so soon as one partner starts to take more as the other money out of the business, Abe, then there is right away trouble. But certainly, Abe, Morris wouldn't do nothing like that." "Sure not," Abe replied, "because in the first place, Saul, he knows I wouldn't stand for it, and in the second place, Morris ain't out to do me, you understand. I will say for Morris this, Saul. Of course a partner is a partner, Saul, and the best of partners behaves like cutthroats at times, but Morris was always white with me, Saul, and certainly I think a whole lot of that feller. Just to show you, Saul, I got Miss Cohen to fix it up for us a statement of our drawing account, which I got it right here in my breast pocket, and I ain't even looked at it at all. So sure am I that everything is A-OK." "I bet you overdrew him yet," Saul observed. "Me? I ain't such a big spender, Saul," Abe replied as he unfolded the statement. "I don't even got to look at the statement, because I know we drew just the same amount. Yes, here it is, Saul. Me, I drew $6,200, and Morris drew 6,200 and—" "Well, what do you think for a sucker like that?" "Why, what's the matter, Abe?" Saul cried. Abe's face had grown white, and his eyes glittered with anger. "That's a loafer for you," he went on. "That feller actually pocketed $52 of my money." $52, Saul repeated. "What are you making such a fuss about $52 for?" "With you I suppose $52 is nothing, Saul," Abe retorted. "I suppose you could pick up $52 in the street, Saul. What? Wait till I see that robber tomorrow. I'll fix him. Actually, I thought that feller was above such things, Saul." "Don't excite yourself, Abe," Saul began. "I ain't excited, Saul," Abe replied. "I ain't a bit excited. All I would do is I will go back to the store and draw a check for $52. I wouldn't let that beat get ahead of me, not for 1 cent, Saul. If I would sit down with my eyes closed for 5 minutes, Saul, that loafer would do me for my shirt. I must be on the job all the time, Saul, otherwise that feller would have me on the streets yet." For a quarter of an hour longer, Abe reviled Morris, until Saul was moved to protest. "If I thought that way about my partner, Abe," he said, "I'd go right down and see Feldman and have a dissolution yet." "That's what I will do, Saul," Abe declared. "Why I should tie myself up any longer with a cutthroat like that. I tell you what we'll do, Saul. We'll go over to the store and see what else Miss Cohen found it out. I bet you he rings in a whole lot of items on me with the petty cash while I was away on the road." Together they left Hammersmith's and repaired at once to Potash and Perlmutter's place of business. As they entered the showroom, Miss Cohen emerged from her office with a sheet of paper in her hand. "Mr. Potash," she said, "when you were in Chicago last fall you drew on the firm for $100, and by mistake I credited it to you on your expense account. It ought to have been charged on your drawing account. So that makes your total drawing account $6,300. Abe stopped short and looked at Saul. "What was that you said, Miss Cohen?" he asked. I said that I made a mistake in that statement, and you're overdrawn on Mr. Perlmutter $48, Miss Cohen concluded. Then hurry up quick, Miss Cohen, Abe cried, and draw a check on my personal checkbook account on the Kosciuszko Bank to Potash and Perlmutter for $48, and see that it's deposited first thing tomorrow morning. He handed Saul a cigar. Yes, Saul, he said, if Morris would find out that I am overdrawn on him $48, he would abuse me like a pickpocket. That feller never gives me credit for being square at all, Saul. I would be afraid for my life if he would get on to that $48. Why, the very first thing you know, Saul, he would be going around telling everybody I was a crook and a cutthroat. That's the kind of feller Morris is, Saul. I could treat him always like a gentleman, Saul, and if the smallest little thing happened to us, sucker is the least what he would call me. At this juncture the green baize doors leading to the hall burst open, and Morris himself leaped into the showroom. His necktie was perched rakishly underneath his right ear, and his collar was of the moisture and consistency of a used wash-rag. His clothes were dripping, for he carried no umbrella, and his hair hung in damp strands over his forehead. Nevertheless, he was grinning broadly, as without a word he ran up to Abe and seized his hand. For 2 minutes Morris shook it up and down, and then collapsed into the nearest chair. "Well, Morris," Abe cried, "what's the matter? Couldn't you say nothing? What did you come downtown again for? You should have stayed uptown with Minnie." "'S all right, Abe," Morris gasped. "'S all over, too. The doctor says instead I should be making a nuisance of myself uptown, I would be better off in the store here. He was there before I could get home." "Who was there?" Abe asked. "The doctor?" "Not the doctor," Morris went on. "The boy was there. Minnie is doing fine. The doctor said everything would be all right." "That's good. That's good," Abe murmured. "You oughter see him, Abe. He weighed 10 pounds, Morris continued. "I bet yer he could holler too, like an auctioneer already. Minnie says also I shouldn't forget to tell you what we agreed upon." "What we agreed upon?" Abe repeated. "Why, we ain't agreed upon nothing, so far what I hear, Morris. What do you mean, what we agreed upon?" "Not you and me, Abe," Morris cried. "Her and me. We agreed that if it was a boy we'd call him Abraham P. Perlmutter already." He slapped Abe on the back and laughed uproariously, while Abe looked guilty and blushed deep crimson. "Abraham Potash Perlmutter," Morris reiterated. "That's a fine name, Saul." It was now Saul's turn to take Morris's hand. He squeezed it hard. "I congratulate you for the boy and for the name both," he said. Once more Abe seized his partner's hand and shook it rhythmically up and down as though it were a patent exerciser. "Morris," he said, "this is certainly something which I didn't expect at all. And all I could say is that I got to tell you you would never be sorry for it. Just a few minutes since in Hammersmith's I was telling Saul I got a partner which it is a credit and an honor for a feller to know. He could always trust such a partner to do what is right and square, and also, Morris, Miss Cohen," he broke off suddenly, "you should draw right away another check in my personal book for $100. "To whose order?" Miss Cohen asked. Abe cleared his throat and blinked away a slight moisture before replying. "Make it to the order of Abraham P. Perlmutter," he said, "and we will deposit it in a savings bank, Morris, and when he comes 21 years old, Morris, we will draw it out with anything else what you put in there for him, Morris, and we will deposit it in our own bank to the credit of Potash, Perlmutter and Son." Saul Klinger's face spread into an amiable grin. "You could put me down $10 on that savings bank account too, boys," he said, as he reached for his hat. "I've got to be going now." "Don't you forget you should tell Klein it's a boy," Morris called to him. "I won't forget," Saul replied. "Klein'll be glad to hear it. You know, Morris, Klein ain't such a grouch as most people think he is. In fact, taking him all around, Klein is a pretty decent feller." As he turned to leave, his eye met Abe's, and both of them smiled guiltily. "After all, Abe," Saul continued, "it ain't what partners says about each other, Abe, but how they acts what counts. Ain't it?" Abe nodded emphatically. "An old saying but a true one," Morris declared. "Actions talk louder than words." End of chapter 17, and end of Potash and Perlmutter, their Copartnership Ventures and Adventures by Montague Glass.